In my review series of videos, I tend to focus on larger video game IPs that are beloved by fans, cult classics, or are just some of my personal favorites. But even with little to no online presence, I still feel obligated to discuss smaller titles that deserve more attention, whether it be an indie game or an obscure release that flew under the radar. I did this last year with my Hue video, and I'm doing my due diligence to once again spread the word about another great indie experience, Solar Ash. Released in 2021, I didn't know anything about Solar Ash when I first saw it appear on Game Pass, but the gorgeous screenshots had me intrigued enough to watch the trailer and eventually download the game. I'm glad I did, because I ended up having a good time with it. I played it through twice, once on regular difficulty to get 100% both in-game and for achievements, and then again on hardcore for another achievement. The only thing I'm missing from true 100% is the 3-hour speedrun, which I would like to get at some point in the near future. This game is only around 5 to 8 hours long depending on how much side content you participate in, making it a short but sweet experience that doesn't overstay its welcome. If you enjoy games with fun movement systems, you just might like Solar Ash, and for those who don't know anything about this game and want to hear more, let's talk about it. As soon as I loaded up this game for the first time, I knew my eyes were in for a treat. The environments for each of the game's areas are all visually interesting and distinct from one another, ranging from a gloomy forest to a dilapidated city to a sprawling radioactive coastline. These worlds look surreal and unnatural, which is complemented by the cel-shaded art style and encapsulates the setting perfectly. This game takes place inside of a black hole where time and space are all messed up, causing the areas to appear like they're being ripped apart and woven back into themselves. This effect is being further caused by spoiler-related reasons in the story that I won't talk about quite yet, and I'm not sure that my astrophysics degree quite agrees with this approach, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief and appreciate what's here. And much like the visual presentation, this game's music takes an otherworldly approach. I think if I was to summarize Solar Ash's soundtrack in one word, I would call it apocalyptic. The songs in this OST use a lot of synth and reverb to make each track a bit unsettling, always reminding you of the impending doom these worlds are destined to meet if you fail your mission. Many of the area themes are very atmospheric, while the boss fight themes and songs used in cutscenes are louder and more energetic to make those key moments feel more tense. One minor critique I have for this OST is that many of the more atmospheric tracks all sound very similar, and even after listening to the whole soundtrack in my own time, very few of the total 45 songs stand out. That being said, none of the songs are bad, and I'll be using the ones I enjoyed the most as background music for this video. I believe one of the most important songs for a soundtrack is the first track, establishing the tone followed by the rest of the game, and Solar Ash's main theme called Sundering Kingdoms is amazing. Which, by the way, is a sick name for this game's main theme. I would definitely recommend giving it a listen if you enjoy sci-fi music with apocalyptic vibes. When I think of Solar Ash in the future, it'll be this song specifically that comes to mind. One other smaller point I wanted to mention is that I liked the voice acting for these characters. The main character Ray is voiced particularly well, and it makes the stakes of this story feel more impactful and desperate. This isn't a significant factor for how good I think a game is, so I don't have much to say other than I thought it was good. Solar Ash takes place in a world being consumed by a massive black hole, known as the Ultra Void. The only way to save this world is by activating the Starseed, which will destroy the black hole itself. You play as Ray, the last remaining Void Runner tasked with repairing the Starseed before the Ultra Void consumes everything. This is the main setup of the game, and I found it an interesting enough premise to want to see it through to the end. This story motivates the exploration of various regions around the collapsing world, although you find out quickly that there's more going on than the game initially makes you think. The first cutscene shows Ray jumping into the Ultra Void on her quest to save her world, but she is quickly interrupted by a strange figure that hits you with a cryptic message about another one and wanting to be left alone. It then falcon punches you into oblivion and dumps you into a ruined cave, leaving your suit in disrepair. Ray leaves this cave with two goals in mind, restoring power to the Starseed and finding her fellow Void Runners. She reaches the central crater and activates Sid, an AI companion that explains the lore of the world and helps with finding anomalies in each area. Locating Sid will generally be one of your first goals in each new level you reach, as she acts as your plasma bank, fast travel point, and where you will change your outfits. However, at this point Sid is not functioning properly, prompting Ray to destroy the corruption anomalies in the area to get them back online. This leads to the appearance of a massive anomaly, which represents the boss of that area. For story reasons, these beings are called Remnants, and it'll be very apparent by the end of the game where they get that name from. Now returning to Sid, they inform you of the locations of other Remnants that must be defeated to activate the Starseed. These are located in 5 main regions: the Broken Capital, the Ironwood Basin, the Eternal Garden, the Mirrorsea, and the Luminous Peaks. After destroying the remnant in each area, you'll enter a short cutscene with the ominous Echo character from the beginning of the game. These usually consist of vaguely hinting towards the plot and the truth behind how the starseed actually works. Eventually, the conversations with Echo evolved from vagueness to dropping major hints for the climax of the story. This was extra apparent to me on my second playthrough since I obviously knew how the story concluded, and now I could see how the game was dropping hints right from the beginning. The delivery of the story in this fashion does rely on the typically annoying trope of one character knowing more than everyone else and refusing to share that info until the very end, but I guess I just didn't mind it much here. The slow trickle of hints is enough to allow you to begin piecing things together yourself before the major reveals happen, making it more interesting to try and correctly guess what's really going on with Echo and the starseed. The cutscenes always end with Ray being crushed in the Echo's hand, dumping you back into the world with a destroyed energy cell that requires you to spend more currency to repair it each time. This is one of the most half-assed features in this game, since it's ultimately meaningless and serves no other purpose than to give you something to spend your plasma on. I don't really know why this was included in the game. It's such an odd mechanic that can be immediately negated by simply exploring the levels, which you'll naturally be doing throughout the game anyways. Each subsequent conversation with Echo shows Ray growing more desperate to complete her mission. In one of the last sequences following the defeat of the final remnant, Echo drops major hints towards the source of these abominations, which are basically confirmed to be what remains of Ray's fellow Void Runners. This is further explained during Solar Ash's narrative climax, where Ray travels up to the top of the tower that has been sitting in the center of the crater since the beginning of the game. She reaches the peak and begins to notice something going horribly wrong, realizing that she was too late to save her planet from the Ultra Void. Echo then appears to stop you from activating the seed despite all hope being lost, and drops the bombshell that the starseed does not reverse time, it just loops it. This isn't the first time the starseed has been activated by Ray, and every time she does it, the world breaks slightly more. Beginning this loop caused her to lose a piece of herself, which has culminated into the creation of the Echo she's been having visions of during the game. Echo was the part of her that first tried to save her planet before trapping this world into a time loop, and Ray is the remaining part that refuses to give up and keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again. Ray always believes that there has to be another way, yet there never is. Continuously activating the starseed has trapped Echo into eternal torture, and has created the remnants of her Void Runner friends who are forced to suffer and relive the same loop in these monstrous forms. The time loop has repeated itself so many times that Echo just expects you to do the same thing each time and eternally doom yourself and your friends. The name Remnant also relates to the last bit of hope each of your friends held that, despite all odds, the starseed could fix everything. Each Void Runner, including Ray, wants their world to return to the way it was prior to its encounter with the Ultra Void. They are so desperate that they risked using the starseed even if it could be catastrophic for the universe. This is where the game offers you the final choice. Activate the starseed and repeat the loop, or destroy the starseed, thus finally deciding to let go of your grief and move on. These options represent the bad and good endings of the game, with the bad ending murdering both characters and dumping you right back to the start of the game, and the good ending leading into Solar Ash's final gameplay sequence. You watch Ray get ripped apart as Echo states that this is the first time she cannot see the future. She's shocked that Ray finally decided to give up on her false hope, and wonders why this particular iteration of the time loop led to a different result. Ray utters one last phrase about finally accepting the truth of how she's been causing her friends to suffer and becomes overwhelmed with grief. You then wake up as Echo in an alternate version of the landing site, finally freed from purgatory. You interact with Sid and have a short reunion, then head outside to see Ray transformed into a remnant, deciding this time to save the remnant rather than end its suffering. This leads to the final gameplay sequence of Solar Ash, and much like the other remnant fights I'll talk about later, it's fantastic. It may be my favorite boss in the game due to its story implications and unique presentation that fits for this game's finale. This fight has basically no penalties for mistakes since Echo has no health bar, meaning there's no risk of game overs, empowering you to resolve this nightmare once and for all. After ripping out the last cable and removing the needle stabbed through her chest, Ray is freed and reunites with Echo in a beautiful cutscene of them reaching for each other. You're then woken up by Sid, finally whole again and ending the time loop. The Ultra Void has stabilized and the world can begin to be rebuilt. Ray and Sid have one final conversation, reminiscing on all the people and the home they've lost from this cataclysmic event, but acknowledge that there is still some hope in the world. They agree to begin anew in this world of potential laid out in front of them, and Sid asks Ray if she's okay. Now having accepted her guilt as something she cannot change but must live with and grow from, finally can say that one day she will be. Maybe not today or tomorrow or anytime soon, but with time her wounds will heal, which is a bittersweet way to end the story. When I first completed this game and saw the ending, I thought it was pretty good stuff, but now after going through it in so much more detail for this video, including rewatching cutscenes and listening to numerous audio logs, I have grown to love this world. The themes of learning to process grief and letting go of the past are explored in a very unique scenario, making this game stand out among others that tackle similar subjects. I enjoy pretty miserable stories in video games and TV shows, and this game ranks up high there on my list. There are other bits of world building and lore to be found in the form of NPC side quests, Void Runner logs, and lost journals. I'll talk more about the side quests in a later section, since they don't have major implications in the overall story I'm focusing on here, and the lost journals of Tarragon Danderpaws are more so a checklist for an achievement, so they don't really matter. However, The Void Runner logs are very important for providing additional context for the main story, describing how the Starseed works, the doubts that many of the team members had about activating it, the history of each main area, the experiences that each Void Runner had in these new environments, and how each one spent their final moments before passing away. Here's a brief summary of each one. Ray's log shows how optimistic she is about saving the world, and how everything goes wrong as she breaches the event horizon of the Ultra Void. Irving's log recalls how much he's experienced in his long life and how he's too old to still be doing this. He encounters one of the side quest NPCs and comes to the conclusion that the Ultra Void brings nothing but death and sorrow to all. He describes what the Ultra Void actually does to the structures that enter it and how he refuses to let it end everything he's ever known. He wants the Starseed to work and ensures he finishes his mission before taking one last look at his surroundings before passing away with his dog companion at his side. Versus log describes his journey through what was originally a home planet for an alien civilization. He comments on how cold and empty the war-torn city looks, and how this place once used to be a utopia for the Veruki people. After seeing how ruined this world has become, he views activating the Starseed as the merciful route to finally end this suffering and allow the Veruki civilization to be remembered only for their peaceful society rather than what it eventually became. He also details some events from his home planet, where no one could agree on a solution to the Ultra Void problem they were facing, and it was just left to a small group of Void Runners to do what others didn't have the courage for. The last thing we hear from Verse is commenting on strange chanting coming from another Void Runner over their comms, and him hoping that everyone is able to complete their mission. Piat's log describes him seeing the beauty and the chaos of the Ultra Void, and how he feels an almost spiritual connection to the Eternal Garden. He believes that gods once walked upon this area and reaches some form of enlightenment, considering some of his fellow Void Runners to be simple-minded and not having faith in a higher purpose. Through this belief, he sees the Starseed as a divine power that must be surrendered to and makes it his final goal to see it activated. He views this as fulfilling his destiny and dies believing his purpose has been served. Gozam's log explains more of the science surrounding the Ultra Void, including how they plan to use the Starseed and studying the remains of the strange amphibious species once occupying the Mirrorsea. He doesn't seem optimistic that the Starseed will be able to collapse the Ultra Void, and transmissions coming from another Void Runner about abandoning the mission does not instill much confidence in him. He tries to find a ship to leave this place but fails, and his final log describes something going very wrong as the Starseed is presumably activated. Toufte's log describes the scientific formation of the luminous peak and how fungi have been able to thrive in such a hostile environment. She comes across a library and laments not being able to secure this knowledge for their homeworld. She regrets not spending her final days with her loved ones, as her numerous calculations show them being too late to save these worlds from the Ultra Void's impending doom. She recalls how the Starseed technology was uncovered, with Piat believing it to be some sort of divine intervention, and convinces others that this is the correct course of action, particularly with our main character Ray. Piat wants to believe that the Starseed will reset everything back to the way it was prior to the Ultra Void, but Toufte is not convinced and secretly believes it could threaten all life in the universe. Because of this, she programmed a manual override to prevent the Starseed from activating in the hopes that whoever reaches the end will make the right choice and shut it off once and for all. She then accepts her fate as death inevitably takes another victim in this cold and unjust universe. Of course, everything I just talked about was only a condensed version of these Void Runner logs, and I highly encourage you to read through them yourself when playing Solar Ash. It adds good characterization for each of the Void Runners, and is an interesting way to highlight how different people process tragedies and desperate situations. Ray has a limited number of abilities that are unchanged from start to finish in this game, including a double jump, skating, and boosting. The double jump is pretty self-explanatory, allowing for a quick mid-air correction and gaining extra height. Skating is an alternate movement mode that can be easily toggled using the left trigger, changing Ray's default walk into a faster but less precise glide across any terrain. Once you get a handle on how Ray controls with her movement and turning radius, I almost never walked around for the rest of the game. Skating became my new default as it was always faster, and the game very obviously nudges you towards playing that way. You won't be able to complete any platforming challenges with just walking, except in some specific cases with the third ability, dashing. Pressing the right trigger will launch Ray forward in whichever direction you're currently inputting, allowing you to launch yourself from a standstill at any time. Unsurprisingly, the fastest way to move around this game is by spamming dashes while gliding around to maintain top speed. The special case for walking I mentioned before is when you're on a small platform and need to make a larger jump that requires a dash. In this case, I found myself turning off the skating and just repositioning myself by walking and following up with a stationary dash jump. With simple movement controls comes even more basic combat, which involves clicking just one button to hit enemies in close range. Since this game is not about inputting precise attacks, it's generous enough to make Ray's swing fairly wide so it's easy to hit most enemies within range. This feature is particularly useful for hitting flying enemies, and I appreciate the developers for trying to reduce any potential frustrations that could have come from this. That being said, this combat system really does feel like an afterthought, and probably ranks as my least favorite part of Solar Ash. The enemies you fight in the world are very uninteresting and look about as generic as possible. Some will fly or run fast at you, others will charge towards you or hang back and shoot you with an energy beam. Most of the time they felt like an annoyance, where I simply killed or ran past them just so I could get on with the actual fun parts of the game. I'm glad the primary focus was the movement system and platforming, but I can't ignore the lackluster combat. Ray also has a unique ability called time slipping.
Wow, time slipping.
Wait, you know that?
Yeah,
You've seen that?
yeah. Can you fix that? No.
Upon activation, time slows down significantly, only allowing the camera to be moved at regular speed. This allows you to reorient yourself and grapple to either an enemy, a grapple point, or an objective item like an eyeball anomaly. This ability is very important for combat to safely close the distance between yourself and enemies, and it is required for many of the timed platforming challenges throughout the game. The most important component of the time slip is the increased grapple range, allowing you to reach grappleable entities much more easily. This ability is on a short cooldown, so it cannot be spammed in combat scenarios, but this can be reduced using a particular suit upgrade. This minimal moveset for both platforming and combat results in the complexity and difficulty curve coming more so from the encounter types and environmental design. These types of obstacles will be discussed more in the following section. I think the only part of the movement and world design in Solar Ash that I found to be lacking were the climbable walls of black goo. I wish these were faster to move on, because it can occasionally kill the momentum of an area if it goes on for too long. It's definitely not the end of the world, and potentially could be considered as a nitpick, but I still wanted to mention it. The game world is structured as one central circular area with several levels in orbit around it. These levels are played in a linear order, allowing each one to introduce a new gameplay mechanic that is expanded upon and combined with other new ideas. Some area-specific hazards remain in their respective regions, like radioactivity and lava, but other objects incorporated into the game's numerous movement challenges are typically carried through in future levels. When you first start the game, you'll land in an isolated area to teach the basic movement controls. There are no enemies to fight, and there's no penalty for making mistakes, so you can safely play around with the game's physics. As you leave the starting zone, you'll walk out into the main central hub known as the Crater, which functions as the first real area to showcase the game's core structure. Each area contains multiple anomalies that must be destroyed to fight the main area boss and purge the corruption blocking the starseed. These anomalies are short movement challenges that require you to attack a sequence of nodes along a linear path. The nodes kind of look like needles, which does match what Ray uses to stab the final eye in these sequences, so I'll be calling them these names interchangeably. Destroying these anomalies throughout the different environments featured in each area represent the bulk of this game's main content. One path will have you traveling through the interior of a building, another will have you climbing along walls of goo, another may have you zipping around like Spider-Man. The earlier areas will feature 3 to 4 of these anomalies, with the final areas having up to 5 or 6 before you can access the boss. If you do not like the idea of these trial and error movement challenges, then it's safe to say you will not enjoy this game whatsoever. Personally, as someone who appreciates games that reward fast and precise movement, I enjoyed perfecting these short parkour gauntlets. It's not much of an exaggeration to say that this is basically the whole game, since this is the exact type of gameplay seen in regular level progression and boss fights. Speaking of which, boss fights follow the same structure of moving from node to node in a timed and ordered sequence that leads to stabbing a weak point. Following this procedure 3 times for 3 different sets of needles will defeat the boss and cleanse the area of all corruption. And much like how the environment is primarily responsible for keeping the smaller anomalies interesting to destroy, the varied appearances of these boss entities keep these fights feeling fresh when encountering a new one. They're always a fun way to end an area, compiling everything you've learned into a final challenge. Consider the massive anomaly in the crater. After destroying the 3 smaller corrupted eyes, a large fish-looking creature will appear and begin circling the Starseed Tower. The timed phases for each boss begins when you grapple to it for the first time, meaning that as soon as you touch this fish's back, you're on the clock and need to move quickly. If you don't reach the next node in time, the boss's whole body will glow red and kill you on contact if you don't abandon ship fast enough. However, when you do manage to break the first weak spot, portions of the body's bony shell will dematerialize, leaving less space to navigate in the following phase. This works to alter the node sequence between phases and make the fight progressively more difficult by limiting the safe area for you to skate across. Each phase also feels longer than the previous one, further upping the difficulty to ensure you know the routes well and can execute them quickly. My only complaint is that many of these boss fights do not take advantage of the new mechanics introduced in their respective areas. For example, the bird anomaly could have easily been placed in the city region with tall towers, and the gameplay wouldn't have felt much different. This also makes each boss fight feel a little less unique, and honestly most of them are very similar to one another. The only ones that really stood out to me were the towering soldier in the Mirrorsea and the secret final boss. That being said, I did really enjoy these remnant fights despite their minor shortcomings. Moving back to the game structure, although the crater is technically the first area of Solar Ash, it feels like more of a prologue compared to the following area. The Broken Capital is a city that's been ripped apart by the Ultra Void, and it's a great setting for learning more of this game's mechanics. The area is built around a handful of high-rises that each have unique ways of scaling them, combining rail grinding along tram tracks and slingshotting from grapple points to make vertical traversal very enjoyable. The opening linear area with unlocking elevator shafts with rail grinds was a nice warm-up to the sprawling city in the next area. Something this level succeeds in is teaching players to be observant of their environment. Of course you can use it to highlight where all of the corruption anomalies are in the area, but it's up to you to determine the best way to reach them. One may be on top of a building with no obvious way to scale it, until you notice that it's connected via grapple points to another rooftop that can be reached. Solar Ash really wants you to scan your environment to find the best ways to take advantage of Ray's speed and mobility. A section I liked in this level is traveling through the parking garage and later rail grinding around the exterior of a building to reach its top. It may sound generic, but it was a very memorable early game section that left a good first impression with how much fun it can be just to move around in this world. world. The remnant fight here is another fish-looking creature that now flies, requiring a bit more creativity with figuring out the best way to mount it. The Ironroot Basin is a forest valley with densely packed buildings and a large structure resembling a greenhouse. This domed building houses a large tree within it and can only be accessed after interacting with 3 beacons around the area. This level again makes good use of grapple points for launching yourself around, and features some short sections where you need to dip in and out of cover to avoid enemy lasers. I think this was overall my least favorite level in the game, as it didn't feel quite as unique as the later regions. I also found its layout to be confusing on my first playthrough, due to the use of verticality and many points of interest being obscured from view within lower parts of the level. The remnant fight in this area reminds me of the Tallnecks from Horizon Zero Dawn, being a tall figure in the distance that you have to wait to be in the right position before mounting it. Unlike the Tallnecks though, it can be annoying to chase this guy around while avoiding his massive hyper beams, making this fight more aggravating than anything. The Eternal Garden is a gloomy, fungi-filled world trapped in perpetual nighttime. I found it to be one of the more atmospheric levels in the game, with the endless mushrooms covering the area and the main source of lighting being bioluminescence. The large pits of thorns were also a nice touch. This world introduces a new mechanic in the form of small colored fungi that will open doors or produce grind rails when the correct smoke color is delivered to it. It's not the most complicated puzzle to solve, but the game makes good use of it to reward exploration and scanning the environment for sources of smoke to transfer. Something that this level succeeded in more than others was creating a feeling of progression through the area, which was achieved using these new rail grind fungi. These work to slowly open new parts of the map as you go, rather than letting you loose in a massive area like in the Ironroot Basin. There are merits to both approaches, but I found this method of exploring a new level more engaging. One section that really stood out to me as creative was the pitch black cave found deep underground. After transferring a series of colored smoke and illuminating the fungi within the central temple of the world, a seemingly endless hole will open up for you to jump into. This cave feels darker than dark, with your only sources of light being temporary crystals that light up after being attacked. I found this area of the Eternal Garden to be very memorable and remains as one of my favorite sections in the game. The rest of the anomalies are fun too, especially the one circling this building. Destroying all of these will lower the wall of fungi and allow you to rail grind to the isolated planetoid where the remnant awaits. This massive anomaly resembles a weird looking spider, and many of the node routes you follow begin with moving around its feet to eventually grapple up to its main body. Although the timing felt tight on this boss, and its design was one of the less interesting creatures in the game, it was still a lot of fun to take down. The Mirrorsea is a large radioactive wasteland. The water dam that surrounds the central pavilion gives this location a ruined kingdom vibe, and traveling up this dam to see a massive open ocean of waste was an exciting first time experience. To further complement the grand opening to the main section, the remnant fight of this region towers over the sprawling radioactive sea. Seeing a fallen soldier the size of a building acting as a massive landmark really makes you realize the scale of the world and how dire the situation is. The first thing you see upon entering the Mirrorsea is a massive shipwreckage in the sky, and it looks awesome. It's one of my favorite sights in the game. This world opens with a more linear segment of activating rails via one of this area's new mechanics, electrical generators. These generators can be used in a variety of ways, including powering a jump pad, removing electricity from a rail, and using multiple to create a timed sequence for activating another jump pad. I like that you can see the fluid inside these machines to indicate how much time you have remaining before needing to restart. The other new mechanic is a flower that creates a rail upon being attacked, which shoots out from the opposite side of where you attack it. These are most often used for making a temporary rail, but also give some flexibility for which way you can send it to visit new areas. I think this is a cool idea in theory, but I often found it more annoying to get the right positioning for these rails, despite the game having set directions to send it out to. Regarding the actual area design, I could see some people taking issue with how spread out the minor anomalies are around the map, but it's not something I minded much. This game already feels like it's broken up into dozens of minor challenges, and this is just another way to distribute them. I also just find the act of moving around very fun, and don't necessarily think every level needs to flow well into itself to be fun to play around in. The Luminous Peak is a mountainous volcanic region with vast seas of lava flowing into nothingness. The entire sky is covered in an orange hue, with Ray's home planet looming closer than usual in the distance. It always sits in the skybox through every region in the game, but here it feels like you could almost reach it. The large ball of magma floating in the sky that you travel towards later in the area also looks really cool, along with the bird remnant perched on a mountain overlooking the main area. This level introduces mushrooms appearing like crystals that shoot at a rail grind upwards and lock you onto it, somewhat like those in the Mirrorsea. This rail always comes out in the same direction no matter where you attack the mushroom from, making it very simple and fun to use. The overall structure of this level is fairly linear, with only a few offshoots from the main path leading to minor anomalies. These include a tower early on in the main route, or an island disconnected from the rest of the space. As a result, this level is one of the easier to navigate since you can complete objectives as you go rather than trying to determine how to reach specific ones. This allows the platforming challenges to be well well curated for the player, since developers will know exactly from where you will approach these segments. For example, there's a semi-stealth section where you have to climb along goo while avoiding enemies charging at you and shooting laser beams to knock you off, and the sequence of skating vertically upwards to the magma ball in the sky looked very cinematic. There's also a brief sequence of skating across platforms covered in spikes and submerged in lava that was intense in all the best ways. It makes knowing where to go quite simple, but actually getting there to be the real challenge, which I enjoyed for the final world of the game. There was a minor anomaly at the end of the main path that had you grappling around pillars and corners of buildings like Spider-Man, which may be my favorite anomaly in the game. These challenges made clearing this last world very satisfying, feeling like an appropriate final test of skills you've learned throughout the game. It helps that the remnant fight against the giant bird in the sky was also cool too. Using the crystal mushrooms to launch yourself into the air and grapple to it is sick as hell. Overall, just a really great final level for this game. And since I like ranking things, here's my world ranking for this game. Number 6, the Crater. Number 5, the Ironroot Basin. Number 4, the Broken Capital. Number 3, the Eternal Garden. Number 2, the Mirrorsea. And number 1, the Luminous Peak. On average, I found each world to be better than the previous one, which did make the game less interesting in its opening hours but really pick up later to make for a satisfying endgame. This game also has its fair share of side content with Void Runner caches and character side quests. These caches are lootable objects in the world, and discovering all of these in a single area awards a new suit to choose from. Each of these unlockable suits grants an additional passive ability to Rei, such as decreased cooldowns for time slipping and boosting, extra plasma collected per pickup, marking undiscovered caches on the HUD, restoring health upon hitting enemies, and doubling damage output. I love the designs of each of these outfits, and there isn't one objectively bad choice besides the original starting suit that provides no benefits. Since my favorite part of this game was the physics and speeding around the levels, I found myself sticking with the booster cooldown suit for the whole game. I appreciate that the suit each player uses is based on their personal preference, and they're easily changed using the Sid hologram in each level, so the option for experimentation is available. There is one additional suit upgrade that unlocks after reaching 100% completion, which combines the effects of all suits into one. Even though you'll have unlocked everything by that point anyways, it's still a cool reward and the suit itself looks sweet. This suit also then becomes permanently unlocked for all other files in your account, which makes new playthroughs much easier if you choose to use it. This was a fantastic inclusion, and makes the suit worth getting if you intend to play this game more than once like I did. There are 3 side quests to complete for various characters, telling a self-contained story to expand the lore of the world and learn more about one of its inhabitants. The objectives for these quests are almost exclusively walking up to something like a statue or shipwreck and interacting with it for some text or dialogue. In the Broken Capital, you'll come across a grieving widow named Lyris. She's one of the last remaining Veruki people after the Dross invasion on our home planet, and is looking for her lost husband. Her memory seems to be fragmented, forcing her to continuously relive the same events and typically appearing to be completely dissociated from reality as a result of the Ultra Void. You follow her around to multiple places, eventually leading to a small cave beneath the sacred tree in the Ironroot Basin where her husband is buried. However, he's been there for a long time, indicating that Lyris has visited this burial site countless times and has been forced to relive this tragic series of events far too much. To save Lyris from this eternal loop of misery, Rei figures the most merciful way to help her move on is to activate the Starseed, thus ending the quest and leaving Lyris by her husband's resting place. In the Eternal Garden, you'll find a guy that looks like a plague doctor named Auric. His quest involves speaking to elders around the world and reciting a specific phrase to each one, as he is obligated by virtue of his species to join them in their mycelium network, whatever the hell that means. When you encounter him, it's on the day in which he is to perform the ritual to become an elder of the garden, but something is preventing it from happening. And this is where speaking to the other elders comes in, as they give some insight into Auric and what his deal is. The elders can be rather well hidden, such as this one in the Luminous Peak tucked away on the side of a mountain. From these elders, you learn a couple of things. Auric has never performed a ritual with one of his kind before, which is an issue since he appears to be all alone in the Ultra Void. Auric knows the rituals but isn't fully committed to them, and Auric is seemingly trying to avoid his destiny of joining the elders. It seems that Auric is fearful of the ritual and is not ready to die for the sake of fulfilling his duty. Therefore, the elders deny him the privilege of joining the mycelium network at this time. Auric is distraught by this decision as he is unaware of these things holding him back, but seems intent to continue trying. You then leave Auric alone as he begins to prepare for another pilgrimage, ending the side quest. In the Mirrorsea, you'll receive a radio transmission from a military admiral named Ames who accuses you of interfering with his mission. Upon reaching him high up in his ship, you can pledge allegiance to him to help find all of his lost crew members' ships, which will allow him to recover the first citizen Dungeness Pertinax, whoever that is. These squad ships are spread out across the Mirrorsea, and unfortunately they all experienced brutal deaths. You can read the last field reports sent by each squad, detailing what each one was doing before their final moments. Despite each team passing away, aims can still use their transmissions to determine the location of the distress signal for the first citizen. This leads you to finding their remains among a large treasure hoard which they had been stockpiling. They had even killed members of Admiral Aim's crew to secure their wealth, leading Ames to forego his loyalty and end the first citizen's life. This leaves Ames devastated, though holds out hope that the Ultravoid is responsible for these unfortunate events. After this last chat, Ray leaves him in the Room of Treasure, completing his quest. Overall, I enjoyed these side quests more for the short stories they tell rather than their contributions to the gameplay experience, since walking up to objects or people in the world for some dialogue isn't something I'd call great gameplay. Because of this, I doubt I would ever do them again if I decided to replay Solar Ash in the future, but their existence is still appreciated and I'm glad I experienced them. The last thing I want to discuss is the new difficulty mode unlocked after completing Solar Ash for the first time. Hardcore mode is a major step up in challenge compared to the normal mode, decreasing the time between nodes in all area anomalies and remnant boss fights, and sending you back to your most recent checkpoint upon taking any form of damage. The first change makes logical sense, requiring you to have basically perfect execution, especially during boss fights. It was in this mode that I discovered how much double jumping ruins your momentum, which took discipline to untrain my muscle memory for using it to correct my jumps. There's just no time to fix your mistakes, so you need to avoid making any and strive for perfection. Although this minimal margin of error was frustrating at times, I gotta respect this game for wanting to push players to their limits. They wanted to make this game ridiculously hard, and hardcore difficulty definitely achieves that. You can find countless forum posts online with people struggling on just the first boss in the crater, and admittedly I was one of those people. This boss had me looking up YouTube videos to figure out where I was going wrong, leading me to learn about the double jump stupidity and realizing I simply needed to be better at the game if I wanted to beat it on this difficulty. So I pulled up my big boy pants and suffered through hours of trial and error on these boss fights, and in the end it felt very rewarding. If only I had noticed that the game allows you to use the 100% completion suit in other files on the same profile, which took me until the Eternal Gardens to realize. On the other hand though, the second change that forces a checkpoint respawn after taking damage gets an overwhelming thumbs down for me. Nothing kills the momentum and pacing of a game all about quick and precise movement more than resetting to a checkpoint over and over again. Of course, needing to reset after losing all of your health is understandable, but completely taking you out of the action is so unnecessary. I get wanting to make mistakes more punishing on the higher difficulty, but the stricter time limits already achieve this perfectly. Having to run back to a boss every time like I'm playing Dark Souls just for making the teeniest mistake does not encourage me to get better. It makes me want to stop playing the game. I know the bosses and sludge walls doing their full body damage attack sends you back to a checkpoint regardless of the difficulty, but getting hit by an enemy smaller than my hand does not need to be this brutal. Solar Ash is unlike any game I have ever played. Its art style is gorgeous in the way it depicts a world being warped by the Ultravoid. Its music is both atmospheric and apocalyptic, making you feel like the end of the world is inevitable. The gameplay was fun to master, and many of the worlds you explore all feel distinct from one another. And the story was something that I grew to appreciate as I continued to read about the characters and lore of these places. There were a few shortcomings though, such as some lackluster areas, boss fights lacking unique identities, and side content that was interesting story-wise but not very engaging for their gameplay. Some mechanics could have also been better implemented into other parts of the game, and the combat was a forgettable inclusion. But overall, Solar Ash ended up being one of my favorite surprises of the year so far, and it's yet another example of an experience that only indie games could deliver. If you have Xbox Game Pass, then you should check this game out, otherwise maybe wait for a sale, because I'm not sure if it was worth 50 Canadian dollars personally. Thank you for watching.